I pretended to be a broke freelance editor at my fiancé's elite family dinner. His mother looked at my simple dress, smiled, and offered to pay for social etiquette classes to make me presentable. My fiancé said nothing. They thought they needed to fix the poor girl he brought home, until his father, a top banker, saw my monogram. What he discovered next left them all frozen. I acted like a struggling freelance editor at my fiancé's family dinner. What his father discovered left the room silent. My name is Elena Reed, 32 years old. And to anyone watching me navigate the brick-lined, foggy streets of Boston on my old black bicycle, I look like every other freelance editor, chasing deadlines and strong coffee. My jeans are frayed. My canvas messenger bag is covered in highlighter streaks from manuscript proofs, and the worn leather satchel strapped to my back holds a laptop that's seen better days. It's a comforting analog armor for a digital life. What no one sees is the quiet digital empire behind that simplicity. 3 companies, built not from venture capital, but from stubborn code and sleepless nights spent analyzing market gaps. A data consultancy firm that advises Fortune 500 seconds on predictive modeling, an AI research lab specializing in natural language processing for medical tech, and a small, highly profitable logistics SaaS platform that optimizes shipping routes from a secure data center near the port. The AI lab is my passion. The logistics platform is my cash cow, running on algorithms I wrote 5 years ago. Each runs smoothly enough under my executive team that I could stop working tomorrow and live comfortably for decades. But I never wanted to look comfortable. I wanted to stay invisible. To see people for who they are when they think you have nothing to offer. Even Liam, my fiancé, doesn't know the full extent. He's 35. A kind, grounded architect who grew up in a world where wealth was wallpaper old money, calm, and quiet privilege. He builds beautiful, minimalist structures that defy gravity, and he thinks I spend my days correcting grammar for academics. Last week, while we were reviewing blueprints for a theoretical lakeside cabin he'd designed for us, he reached for my hand and said softly, "My parents want to meet you. They're particular." I smiled, but inside something shifted. I wanted to see what particular meant when they believed I was just a broke editor with a bike and a dream. So I decided not to correct them. Not yet. Because sometimes, truth deserves a stage. And that night, when his father recognized the name of my holding company, everything changed. Have you ever hidden a part of yourself just to see who would still treat you with respect? If you have, tell me. I'd love to know. I grew up in Portland, Maine, a small coastal city where mornings smelled of salt and diesel, and everyone knew the tide schedule by heart. My father, Marcus Reed, was a carpenter. His palms were rough, his nails always clean but chipped, and when I was little, I used to think the smell of sawdust and varnish was what love must smell like. He taught me that structure is everything, that a house built on a weak foundation is just a pretty box waiting to collapse. My mother, Iris, was a local librarian. She didn't just check out books, she curated worlds, running reading programs for local kids, and every night after dinner, she'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of peppermint tea, mending damaged book spines with a small silver blade, while the old radio hummed classical music in the background. We weren't rich, not even close, but our home always felt full of warmth, of honesty, of quiet pride in simple, tangible work. My parents never told me to chase success. They told me to chase meaning. When I was 10, I once asked my mother why the library didn't have a big, flashy electronic sign like the new bank next door. She smiled and said, "Because real value doesn't need polish, Elena. People who know what matters will find the truth anyway." I didn't understand it then, but that sentence stayed with me like an invisible compass, guiding me long after I left Portland. I wasn't the top student in class, but I was curious. I loved patterns, systems, language, how information could make ordinary things feel extraordinary. My mother taught me how to find information, how to follow a thread of curiosity through a dozen books. My father taught me to measure twice and cut once, to value precision. Together, they taught me to see structure and purpose in the chaos. When I got a full scholarship to MIT for computer science, it felt like our small world cracked open. I remember my father's hands trembling slightly as he handed me a folded $100 bill, their entire savings for the month, and said, "Don't let anyone tell you logic isn't creative. It's just a different kind of building." I promised I wouldn't. Boston was nothing like home. It was vast, electric, full of noise and history. I majored in computer science and economics, splitting my time between coding boot camps in basements and analyzing market reports in the library. To cover living costs, I worked as a part-time barista, then as a data entry assistant at a small publisher, and finally as a freelance technical editor for research papers. There were weeks when I slept 4 hours a night, fueled by cafeteria coffee and the glow of a terminal screen. But I didn't mind. I was learning how the tech world worked and how fragile it was. After graduation, I joined a data analytics startup run by two brilliant but reckless founders. For a year, we lived on instant noodles, pitching to investors who never called back, trying to build something revolutionary from pure enthusiasm. When the company folded because our predictive model was just slightly too ahead of its time, I thought I'd failed. But failure, as I would later learn, is just tuition for the lessons no school teaches. It's the cost of beta testing your own life. I took my last paycheck, barely enough for rent, and started freelancing again as an editor and data consultant. I rented a tiny studio apartment in Somerville, set up an old MacBook on a folding table, and began taking small projects, editing technical manuals for software companies, cleaning datasets for graduate students, optimizing complex spreadsheets for small businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. 2 years later, I tried again. My first company, a small consultancy offering data analysis for local businesses. It worked for a while, helping cafes optimize inventory and boutiques target their social media ads. Then a major client defaulted on a massive payment, and I had to shut it down, missing payroll by 2 days. That one hurt more than the first, but it taught me how to negotiate contracts, how to protect my intellectual property, and how to lead without needing to impress. The second startup focused on logistics optimization for SaaS companies, and that one took off. We didn't go viral or get acquired. We grew slowly, quietly, but sustainably, building a reputation for clean code and unbreakable security. Within 3 years, I'd built enough recurring clients to start a third venture, the AI research lab that provided high-level predictive modeling for boutique investment firms and, eventually, biotech. Together, those 3 companies now bundled under the Reed Collective became my life's quiet architecture. Nothing flashy, but solid, stable, self-sustaining. And yet, even with all that, I never felt the need to announce it. I still lived simply, biking to meetings, wearing thrifted sweaters, eating at the same noodle shop near my apartment. I refused to upgrade to luxury because luxury, to me, was freedom. Freedom to say no, to choose projects that mattered, to disappear when I wanted. Money, I realized, can build cages disguised as comfort. I didn't want that. I wanted lightness, the kind that lets you wake up every morning and feel unchained. My parents visited once, years later, when my second company finally turned a major profit. I took them to dinner at a small seafood restaurant overlooking the harbor, one that didn't have tablecloths but served the best lobster in the city. The second startup focused on logistics optimization for SaaS companies, and that one took off. We didn't go viral or get acquired. We grew slowly, quietly, but sustainably, building a reputation for clean code and unbreakable security. Within 3 years, I'd built enough recurring clients to start a third venture, the AI research lab that provided high-level predictive modeling for boutique investment firms and, eventually, biotech. Together, those 3 companies now bundled under the Reed Collective became my life's quiet architecture. Nothing flashy, but solid, stable, self-sustaining. And yet, even with all that, I never felt the need to announce it. I still live simply, biking to meetings, wearing thrifted sweaters, eating at the same noodle shop near my apartment. I refused to upgrade to luxury because luxury, to me, was freedom. Freedom to say no, to choose projects that mattered, to disappear when I wanted. Money, I realized, can build cages disguised as comfort. I didn't want that. I wanted lightness, the kind that lets you wake up every morning and feel unchained. My parents visited once, years later, when my second company finally turned a major profit. I took them to dinner at a small seafood restaurant overlooking the harbor, one that didn't have tablecloths but served the best lobster in the city. My mother, wearing her best floral dress, looked around the place and whispered, "You did all this?" I nodded. My father didn't say much. He just squeezed my hand and said, "I'm proud of you. But don't forget where you came from. A strong foundation matters more than the paint." I promised him I wouldn't. After they left, I sat by the harbor that night, watching planes descend into Logan, and thought about how success changes people. Not always in the ways you can see. Some become louder, some become colder. I wanted to become quieter, to let my work speak when I didn't. That's why when I met Liam years later, I didn't tell him how much I earned or what I owned, not because I wanted to deceive him, but because I wanted to protect the part of me that still belonged to the girl from Portland, the one who believed in effort over image. I told him I was a freelance editor, and that was true, just not the whole truth. I learned early that people treat you differently when they think you have money. Their kindness turns strategic. Their respect becomes conditional. I didn't want that. I wanted love that didn't need labels or bank statements. I met Liam on a gray March morning in Boston. The kind of morning when the sky feels like it's thinking too hard about raining, but never quite commits. I'd been invited to speak on a small panel at an Urban Futures Symposium at the Boston Society of Architects. My official bio listed me as an independent editor and data researcher, which was technically true. My topic was using predictive data in urban planning, focusing on how migration algorithms could anticipate infrastructure stress. I remember standing near the 3D printed models of future cityscapes afterward, sketchbook in hand, half listening to a debate about sustainable materials, when a man's voice beside me said, "Your data model is elegant, but it forgets that people have to live in the spaces your algorithm optimizes. A city isn't just an efficiency problem." I turned, half amused, half ready to argue. He was tall, dressed in an old wool sweater and jeans, not the tailored suit of the other architects, a faint smudge of graphite on his wrist, a detail that made me pause. He wasn't trying. He wasn't performing. He was just there. We spent the next half hour arguing, him advocating for the human-scale chaos of Jane Jacobs, me defending the systemic elegance of data-driven design. When I told him I edited technical papers, he smiled. "So, you make complex things readable?" "No," I laughed. "I make the things people already need usable." There's a difference. That line made him grin. The kind of grin that stays with you for days. Over the next few weeks, our paths kept crossing. He turned out to be an architect at a small, ethics-focused firm 2 blocks from the co-working space I used as my freelance editor office. Sometimes after work, he'd drop by with coffee and stories about impossible zoning laws, or his love-hate relationship with brutalist architecture. He spoke the language of physical structure, of materials and light, while I lived in datasets and logic. But somewhere between concrete and code, we met in the middle. Our first real date wasn't planned. It was a rainy Thursday when my bike chain snapped near the university district. I was late for a fake client meeting, soaked and ready to curse the world when I heard someone call my name. Liam had been leaving a site visit nearby. He offered me a ride, and when I hesitated, he said, "It's not pity, it's logistics." That made me laugh. So I said yes. We ended up skipping both our meetings and ducking into the Trident Bookstore Cafe on Newbury, where we talked for hours over bowls of soup. We talked about cities we'd never been to, the buildings that shaped us, the kind of work we'd do if money didn't matter. By the time we stepped back outside, the rain had stopped. He looked at me and said softly, "It's strange, but I feel like I've known you longer than a few weeks. Maybe we met in a past life at a blueprint archive." I smiled. That was how it started. Slow, organic, unforced. He was patient, kind, and funny in the most unassuming ways. He remembered how I liked my coffee, black, 2 sugars, brought me old architecture books from the library, and listened when I talked about the ethics of data collection like it was philosophy, not business. With him, I felt safe enough to be simple, and maybe that's why I kept my world small around him. He knew I was an editor. He'd seen my freelance portfolio, the simple website I'd built in an afternoon. It was actually a front for screening contractors for the Reed Collective. I told him I had a few long-term clients and that I made enough to live comfortably. That was true, just not the full picture. What I didn't say was that one of my long-term clients was my own AI lab, or that the server bills he teased me about were for 3 separate operations. I didn't tell him because I didn't want to see that shift in his eyes, the one people get when numbers enter the room. I wanted the man who argued with me about urban planning, not the man intimidated by my balance sheet. Liam's world was different. He came from a family that didn't just have money. They had lineage. The Sinclairs. His parents lived in a sprawling brownstone in Beacon Hill, overlooking the Common, a home where neighbors included senators and old family names carved into donor walls at the MFA. His father, Arthur Sinclair, was a managing director at an investment bank. His mother, Margot, was a prominent museum board member and philanthropist. Liam, though, never bragged. If anything, he carried that privilege like a quiet burden, something he couldn't escape but didn't quite want to own. Once, while walking through the Arnold Arboretum, he told me about growing up in a house where success wasn't celebrated, it was expected. My dad used to say, "If you have to announce it, it's not real." He laughed, but I could hear the fatigue underneath. I asked him what his parents thought of architecture as a career. He hesitated before answering. "They think it's noble. As long as you're designing museums or their friends' summer homes. My little firm, they see it as a hobby." That was the first crack, small, almost invisible. But it hummed quietly between us after that. Whenever the topic of family came up, his shoulders would tense, and I'd change the subject. I didn't mind at first. Everyone has ghosts. But as the months went by, I realized he wasn't just avoiding their opinions, he was afraid of them. He'd say things like, "They're just traditional," or "They mean well." But the truth was simpler. Liam was still trying to earn their approval. The first time I met Margot, it was through a video call. Liam had left his phone on the counter while grabbing coffee, and when it buzzed with, "Mom," I answered instinctively. "Hello," I said, smiling politely. There was a pause, then a voice, smooth, poised, unmistakably controlled, replied, "Oh, you must be Elena." She said my name like she was tasting it for the first time. I explained Liam was busy, but she kept talking casual questions disguised as small talk. "You're an editor, right? Freelance. How lovely." A pause. "My cousin's son proofreads legal briefs for his father's firm too. It's such important support work." I smiled. "That's wonderful." Then came the pause. I imagine freelance work can be uncertain, but I suppose freedom matters more to some people. That word, freedom, carried a tone I'd heard before from clients who assumed I couldn't afford to say no. It does, I replied calmly. I think freedom is the only real luxury. She smiled thinly before Liam came back into the frame. All flustered apologies, but after the call, he didn't ask what we'd talked about. Maybe he didn't want to know. Still, our relationship grew. We moved in together after 2 years, into a small apartment above a bakery in the North End. We built routines, Saturday market runs, late-night debugging sessions, his blueprints, my editing projects, shared takeout on the couch. It was simple. It was enough. But occasionally I'd catch him staring when I paid for dinner or when I turned down expensive trips his friends proposed. Once he said softly, "I just don't want you to feel lesser." I looked up. Lesser than what? He hesitated. Than what they expect. That was when I realized he wasn't ashamed of me. He was afraid I'd embarrass them. The night he finally said, "My parents want to meet you. For dinner. At their place." I smiled and said yes. But inside, something small and cold twisted in my chest. Not fear, not insecurity, but anticipation. Because if their world ran on appearances, I wanted to see how it would treat a woman who looked like she had none. And somewhere deep down, a quieter voice whispered, "They won't see you until they need to." The day of the dinner arrived, wrapped in a thin silver fog, the kind that turned Boston's skyline into a watercolor. I woke early, though I hadn't slept much. My studio apartment was quiet, the air still scented faintly with old books and coffee. I stood by the window, watching raindrops trace patterns down the glass. This wasn't nerves. It was preparation. To my data-driven mind, this dinner wasn't a social trial. It was an experiment. The variables were set. My appearance, my career. I was simply going to observe the results. By noon, I began preparing the little details of my performance. Though performance felt too grand a word, it was more like a costume test for a role I already knew by heart. The broke but passionate intellectual. I opened my wardrobe and let my eyes linger over the neat row of tailored blazers and silk blouses. The kind I wore for investor meetings and board presentations. They hung there in quiet defiance, whispering reminders of another life I wouldn't bring into the room tonight. My fingers drifted past them until I reached a simple linen dress folded at the back of the shelf. It was soft, charcoal gray, the hem brushed with age. I'd worn it years ago when I was still hustling for freelance editing gigs, reading manuscripts in drafty cafes. I slipped it on and turned toward the mirror. The fabric fell simply, no structure, no brand, just honest cloth against skin. Next came the shoes. Simple leather flats, clean, but worn into the kind of comfort that tells stories of long walks and library floors. I tied my hair in a low bun, added a dab of lip balm, and skipped the jewelry. I owned pieces that could have paid for their entire wine collection, but I left them in their drawer. Tonight wasn't about shining, it was about blending in. When I opened the drawer of my work desk, I found what I needed. My old portfolio, the one with physical printouts of articles I'd edited. Its edges were slightly bent, its cover smudged. Nothing screamed wealth or success. It looked humble, even academic. Perfect. I tucked it carefully into my canvas messenger bag beside a small, neatly wrapped gift for the Sinclairs. It was a rare, first-edition copy of a poetry book by a minor Maine author, one my mother had loved. I'd found it in a dusty Portland bookshop last summer. I wrapped it in simple brown paper, tied with twine. I didn't handwrite a tag. Instead, I tucked a simple, cream-colored bookmark inside, embossed with my personal monogram, a subtle E.R. It was a habit from my consulting days, clean, minimal branding. I hadn't considered it would be a clue. As the afternoon dimmed into that soft blue light between day and evening, I sat at my work table, tracing the edge of my coffee cup, thinking, people reveal themselves when they believe no one important is watching. And tonight, I wanted to know who the Sinclairs were when they thought I didn't matter. I remembered something my father once said while planing a piece of wood. When you test a structure for strength, you don't hammer it. You just add weight. Slowly. Until it speaks. That was what tonight would be. Not a fight. Just weight added carefully until truth creaked through the polish. By 6, the fog outside had thickened. I slung the bag over my shoulder and started walking toward the T station. The historic cobblestones of Beacon Hill were slick with mist when Liam met me at the corner of his parents' street. He was waiting near a gas lamp, his coat neatly pressed, his expression both excited and uneasy. "You look beautiful," he said softly. But I could hear the hesitation, as though he didn't know whether his parents would agree. "Thank you," I replied, smiling. "It's just an old dress." He reached for my hand, but his grip was tense. "Just don't take anything they say personally, okay? My mom has a way of sounding sharp." I finished for him, amused. He sighed. "I'm sorry in advance." "Don't be," I said, squeezing his hand lightly. "I'm curious to meet them." As we walked the last block, the brownstones grew larger, their brass knockers gleaming. The air faintly perfumed with old money and damp ivy. When we turned the final corner, I saw the Sinclair residence. It was a 4-story brick mansion, its windows glowing amber against the twilight. A polished black door stood waiting. Liam paused, took a deep breath, and turned to me. "Ready?" I smiled, pushing the door open. "More than you think." The Sinclair house looked less like a home and more like a private wing of the museum Margot sat on the board of. From the moment I stepped through the doorway, I was greeted by an orchestra of quiet luxury. The subtle scent of beeswax and old paper, the gleam of polished mahogany floors, and the hush of money so old it didn't have to announce itself. On the walls hung large, important-looking paintings, portraits of ancestors and serious landscapes, perfectly spaced beneath recessed lighting. Margot stood at the top of the short foyer stair, her smile a flawless sculpture of grace and calculation. Her dress was simple, dark blue cashmere, understated, but unmistakably couture. "Elena, dear," she said, descending with practiced poise. "You made it. How lovely to finally meet you in person." Her eyes swept over me in one smooth motion, taking in the linen dress, the worn flats, the brown paper-wrapped book in my hands. The smile never faltered, but something flickered behind her gaze. Curiosity wrapped in judgment, like an appraiser looking at a clever fake. I offered the book. "I brought something small. A book of Maine poetry I thought you might enjoy." "How thoughtful," she said, accepting it delicately. "Homemade?" "Not exactly," I replied, "but rare." She gave a soft laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "How charming. Arthur will appreciate the gesture. Won't you, dear?" Her husband appeared from the study, tall and silver-haired, with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being deferred to. "Arthur Sinclair." "Ah," he said, extending a hand. "So, this is the editor." His handshake was firm, polite, but impersonal, like closing a deal. I smiled. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Sinclair." "Arthur, please," he corrected. "We're all family here." He glanced at Liam, who stood behind them, smiling nervously. "Liam's told us so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Arthur chuckled. "Mostly. He tells us you're the one keeping him grounded from his more abstract architectural ideas." They led me into the living room, where every surface gleamed glass, silver, polished wood. "Such understated style you have," Margot said as she motioned for me to sit on an antique sofa. "It's refreshing these days to meet someone who doesn't chase trends." "Thank you," I replied. I like things that last. Yes, of course, she said smoothly. Timelessness over fashion. I admire that. Though sometimes, she added lightly, the right framing can make a woman's simplicity shine even brighter. Her gaze flicked toward my bare wrists and neck. I suppose I haven't found the right frame yet. I smiled. Dinner was announced by a housekeeper. The dining room was everything you'd expect. A long linen-covered table, heavy crystal glasses, and silverware that felt weighted with history. As the first course arrived, a delicate beet salad, Margot gestured toward my plate. You must love beautiful things, Elena, being in the world of words and all. I do, I replied. But I think beauty is a side effect of function done well. A well-structured sentence. A clean argument. How interesting, she said, tilting her head. I suppose that's why your work must be so creative. Liam mentioned you're a freelancer. Yes, that's right. Oh, must be exciting, Arthur chimed in. Never knowing what the next month will bring. It keeps me on my toes, I said lightly. Margot leaned forward, her voice honeyed. If you ever need help with connections, dear, we'd be happy to introduce you. We know several publishing houses. You'd have more structure, perhaps. A real career path. That's generous of you, I said, meeting her gaze. But I'm happy where I am. I value freedom more than structure. Ah, freedom, she said softly, nodding. Such a lovely word. Though, of course, it's easier to enjoy when you don't have to think about bills or retirement plans. Liam shifted beside me, clearing his throat. Mom. Oh, I'm only teasing, she said, waving a hand. We're just talking. But the air had changed. Arthur turned to me again. So, what kind of clients do you usually work with? Academics? Mostly, I said smoothly. Research papers, dissertations, technical manuals. Startups. Things like that. Very noble, he said. Supporting the little guys. Margot smiled. It's nice that you're not materialistic. But Liam mentioned you live in the North End? Oh, that area's so artistic, she said, as though the word itself carried dust, full of charm and street festivals. We used to attend a fundraiser there once a year. It's a beautiful community, I said evenly. It feels alive. Of course, she said. Still, I do hope you'll let us help you adjust. Once you and Liam are married, you'll be attending certain functions with us. Fundraisers, museum galas. It's not just about clothing, dear. It's about presentation. It's a different world, and it can be overwhelming. Liam coughed softly. Mom, she'll be fine. Margot raised her wine glass delicately. Of course she will. I was just thinking, Elena, that I'd be happy to sponsor you for some social etiquette and networking classes. Just to help you feel more comfortable. It's a small investment in your future with Liam, don't you think? The offer hung in the air. Delicate and poisonous. Social etiquette and networking classes. For a moment, I just looked at her. The perfectly preserved elegance. The practiced stillness of her face. It was a masterpiece of condescension. Delivered so smoothly, you could almost miss the insult tucked neatly inside it. It wasn't an offer of help. It was a diagnosis. She had assessed me, found me lacking, and prescribed a cure. Liam's fork clinked quietly against his plate. He hadn't said much all evening, and now his silence was a roaring vacuum. I could feel the tension radiating from him, his shoulders tight, his eyes darting between me and his mother. A man watching two worlds edge closer than he wanted them to. Mom, he said, his voice quiet, strained. Oh, nonsense, darling, Margot said quickly, waving her hand. It's not a criticism. It's a kindness. The world we move in is complex. Elena is a smart girl. I'm sure she'll appreciate the advantage. I smiled, setting my wine glass down. That's generous of you, Margot. She blinked, sensing the shift but not the angle. Oh, don't be silly, dear. It's not about money, it's about presentation. Then I'll continue presenting authenticity, I said. It's the one thing no one can counterfeit. Arthur chuckled, perhaps to ease the tension, but it only deepened. You're quite independent, aren't you? I try to be. That's admirable, he said. Though the word admirable landed like impractical. But marriage, Elena, isn't about independence. It's about partnership, shared goals, shared finances, stability. You understand that, I hope. I do, I said evenly. I also understand that stability means different things to different people. To some, it's a paycheck. To others, it's purpose. He leaned forward slightly, the banker in him emerging. And which one are you? The kind who builds both, I said. That earned me another silence. The kind that vibrates with disapproval too polite to voice. Margot's smile returned, though it looked more like armor now. You have such modern ideas about success, she said. But tell me, what about the practical things? Health insurance? A retirement plan? You can't live off ideals forever. Luckily, I said softly, ideals aren't what I live off. Her eyes flicked toward Liam, searching for backup. He stared down at his plate. Arthur cleared his throat. Well, Liam's done well for himself at the firm. Once you're married, I'm sure he'll be able to handle most of the— I don't expect him to, I interrupted gently. The room went still. Margot's fork froze halfway to her plate. Arthur's eyebrows lifted slightly. I kept my voice calm, almost kind. I believe in partnership, not dependency. I'd rather pull my own weight than become his burden, financial or otherwise. Arthur gave a slow, deliberate nod. Admirable again, but let's be honest. Freelance editing isn't exactly a safety net. Neither is inherited comfort, I replied, smiling. That landed. He looked at me differently now. Not angry, but unsettled. People like him weren't used to being answered without apology. Margot set down her fork, her tone cooling a few degrees. You know, Elena, there's something I've learned after 30 years in this circle. Presentation matters. Not because it's shallow, but because people judge what they see long before they listen. In our circles, she said, leaning slightly forward, image is everything. Her words hung there, sharp and deliberate. I looked at her. My heart beat steady. Then maybe it's time your circle learned to look deeper. Her lips parted, just slightly surprised, flickering before she smoothed it away. Mom, please. Liam finally spoke, his voice quiet but strained. It's all right, I said gently, turning to him. We're just comparing philosophies. Margot exhaled through her nose, smiling again, though this time it didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. Of course, dear. Philosophies. Dessert plates were cleared in silence. The faint sound of silver against china filled the void. As we stood to move to the parlor for coffee, Margot finally glanced at the gift I'd brought, which was still sitting, unopened, on a side table. Oh, goodness, we completely forgot, she said, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. Ooh! The smell of roasted coffee and old money filled the Sinclair's parlor. As we moved into the room, the space looked like a curated exhibit. Sleek walnut furniture, a grand piano polished to a mirror sheen, and a wall lined with art books no one had ever opened. Margot sat on a velvet couch as Arthur poured coffee into delicate porcelain cups. Liam stood near the fireplace, still quiet, still tense, a man suspended between two worlds. Really, dear, Margot said, gesturing to the brown paper-wrapped gift. You mustn't have gone to the trouble. It wasn't any trouble, I said evenly, just something small to say thank you. She smiled and reached forward, picking at the twine. How sweet. I'll admit I'm curious what kind of books editors prefer. She unwrapped it, revealing the old, cloth-bound cover. Oh, poetry. How? Traditional. She opened the cover, and the small, cream-colored bookmark I'd tucked inside fluttered onto her lap. The bookmark I'd had embossed with my personal monogram. Arthur, handing me a cup, noticed it first. He leaned over and picked it up. It was simple, thick cardstock, with 2 letters pressed into the paper. E.R. He froze. His hand, halfway to the decanter, stopped midair. His eyes lingered on the monogram. His expression shifted subtly, the way a man's might when he hears a distant alarm he can't quite place. E.R., he murmured. He looked at me, studying my face now with something very different from polite curiosity. There was recognition and disbelief. That's your monogram, I assume? Yes, I said. Elena Reed. Reed, he repeated, tasting the name. Reed. From Boston? He was no longer talking to me but to himself. His mind, the banker's mind, running calculations. You wouldn't happen to be related to Reed Analytics, would you? The room went still. Even the quiet classical music from the speakers seemed to hesitate. I met his gaze calmly. I'm not related, I said. I am Reed Analytics. For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he gave a short, incredulous laugh. Not mocking, just shocked. You mean you? You run it? Yes, I said softly. That, and 2 other companies under the holding group, the Reed Collective, a logistics SaaS and an AI lab. Liam's head snapped toward me. His voice cracked slightly. Part confusion, part realization. I didn't look at him. I kept my focus on Arthur, whose composure was slipping by the second. Your bank, I continued gently, advised on the Ethelred deal last quarter. Correct? He blinked, speechless. Yes, he said after a pause, his voice quieter now. Yes, our M&A division handled the financing. Well, I continued, Ethelred is one of my clients. My lab's predictive modeling was the analysis that secured that merger. So, technically, I suppose your company and mine already know each other. You just didn't know my name was on the invoices. Margot's cup clinked softly against its saucer. I'm sorry, she said, forcing a small laugh. I must be missing something. You mean you own the company? As in, yes. I replied. I founded all 3. Liam still hadn't moved. Elena, why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned to him finally, because I wanted to know if I mattered without it. Margot looked from me to Arthur, then back again, her expression unraveling, composure fading into discomfort. That's quite the surprise, she said, her voice trembling faintly. Arthur, still stunned, cleared his throat. You're that Reed. He stopped, then chuckled under his breath. God. You're the reason that Ethelred deal didn't collapse? Our client was going to pull out until your group's report came in? We all thought Reed was some old tenured professor at MIT. Some reclusive genius. He let out a slow exhale, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, I'll be damned. Liam's stunned question, Elena, why didn't you tell me? Hung in the air, a testament to how little he truly understood. I finally turned to him, my gaze soft but unwavering. Because I wanted to know if I mattered without it. I wanted to know if the woman you met at the architecture symposium, the one who edits papers and argues with you about urban planning, was enough. I wanted to see if you loved the person, not the potential or the polish. He stammered, his face pale, caught between shock and a dawning, terrible shame. Arthur, meanwhile, had recovered from his shock and shifted instantly from social host to strategic banker. The disdain was gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating respect. Reed, he said again, almost to himself. My God. Our analytics division has been trying to get a meeting with your AI lab for 6 months. They said your team's models, they're not just predictive, they're foundational, we thought. You thought I was a reclusive male professor at MIT? I finished for him. My voice calm. Most people do. My team is exceptional. Well, you must understand, dear. Margot suddenly cut in, her voice trembling faintly as she tried to reclaim control, to reframe the narrative. We had no idea. Liam never mentioned. Because Liam didn't know, I said. My focus remaining on her. And that's exactly the point. I see. Her eyes darted toward her son. You didn't? Liam swallowed. No. She never told me. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was stunned, heavy with the sound of perception cracking open. I leaned back slightly, folding my hands in my lap. I wasn't hiding anything. I just didn't feel the need to lead with it. I wanted to see how people treated me without the filter of a last name. Well, you certainly got your answer tonight, Arthur said, a note of genuine grim respect in his voice. Yes, I said softly. I did. Margot tried to recover, straightening her shoulders, forcing the hostess' smile back onto her face, though it was now brittle as spun glass. Well, this is just marvelous. Arthur, isn't it marvelous? Elena, dear, you must forgive our little misunderstanding. She gave a light, tinkling laugh that sounded entirely false. My goodness, those etiquette classes. How silly of me. Clearly you could teach them. The pivot was instant. The respect was conditional, triggered only by the revelation of wealth and status. I had my answer. I stood slowly, setting my untouched coffee down. You were right about one thing, Margot, I said, my voice clear and quiet, cutting through the room. Presentation does matter. And tonight, you, Arthur, you both presented yourselves perfectly. I let the words hang there, the implied meaning settling over them like dust. Margot's face flushed faintly. I turned to Arthur. It was a pleasure to finally put a face to the name on the Ethelred paperwork. It was a professional, courteous, and final dismissal. I picked up my canvas messenger bag. Elena, wait, Liam said, finally finding his feet. He stepped toward me, his face torn. Don't go. We need to talk about this. I looked at him, and for the first time all night I let the sadness show. We should have been talking all night, Liam. Every time your mother offered to fix me, every time she called my work support and charming, every time she suggested I wasn't good enough for your world, I paused. You were silent. Your silence was an answer. I was trying to keep the peace, he whispered, his eyes pleading. I didn't know. You didn't know what? I asked, my voice still gentle. That I didn't need protecting? Or that I was secretly powerful? Which one would have made you speak up, Liam? The first one should have been enough. He winced, the truth of it hitting him. He had no answer. I walked toward the grand foyer. Elena, Arthur called out, his tone now respectful. Please. I apologize, You were honest, I said, pausing at the door. You treated me exactly how you thought a person with no connections and no structure deserved to be treated. I appreciate the clarity. I turned to Margot, who looked like her perfect world had fractured. I won't be needing those etiquette classes, but I am launching a new mentorship program. It's called Code Her Future. It's for young women in STEM who are often told their work is just support for someone else's career. Perhaps you'd like to sponsor a few of them instead. Real talent, not just polish. I didn't wait for a reply. I looked at Liam. You should stay. It's family time. And with that, I opened the heavy black door and stepped out into the cold, foggy Boston night. The cobblestones were slick with mist. The silence of Beacon Hill was profound, broken only by the distant sound of a siren. I breathed in the cold, damp air, and the tightness in my chest finally eased. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was clarity. Headlights flashed behind me. Liam's car. He pulled up beside me, got out, and stood in the soft light spilling from the gas lamps. Elena, please, can we talk? I didn't move closer. You had hours to talk, Liam, I said softly. You chose silence. I was a coward, he said, his voice breaking slightly. They've always been like this, I thought. You thought I was the one who needed to change to fit them. I finished for him. You never once thought they might be wrong. I don't want to lose you. Then find me, I said, meeting his eyes. Find me. Elena Reed. The woman who loves data and old books and rides a bike in the rain, not the reflection you wish you saw, and not the CEO you just discovered. When you're ready to stand next to that person, then we can talk. I let the words hang in the cold air between us. He looked down, his jaw tight, his hands clenched in his coat pockets. I turned and started to walk down the hill, my old flats tapping quietly on the ancient stones. Elena? He called out, his voice small. I paused, looking back one last time. Your AI models. I'd love to see them sometime. I smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. You still don't get it, do you? I turned and kept walking, disappearing into the fog,